Some vegetable plants give you a small harvest and take up a lot of room. But look at this bean plant. It keeps growing upward, it becomes incredibly dense, and there are pods hidden throughout the foliage. Some are already dry, some are still young and green, and there are even flowers appearing late in the season. So how much food can you actually get from a relatively small area when your beans grow upward instead of spreading everywhere? This is what our bean patch looked like, and the results were much more interesting than we expected. When you look at a mature bean plant like this, the first thing you notice is how tall and dense it has become. Instead of seeing an open patch of soil with a few scattered plants, you see a wall of green foliage with bean pods appearing throughout it. And that's what makes this kind of bean growing so interesting to us. The plant doesn't just sit in one place. It grows upward, and as it develops, the foliage becomes dense enough that you have to look carefully to find all of the pods. That's exactly what we're seeing here.
Some of the pods are already dry.
Others are still young. And there are also green pods that can be collected gradually and used later. So, when you first look at this patch, you might think the harvest is already finished. But it isn't. There are still different stages of the crop happening at the same time. You can find mature, dry pods. You can find smaller green pods. And when you look carefully, you can even see flowers. That makes the plant much more interesting than it might appear from a quick glance. Instead of everything being ready at exactly the same moment, there are pods at different stages. And that means there isn't necessarily one single moment when you have to collect everything. You can gradually pick the green beans that are ready while allowing other pods to continue developing. This is one of the things we noticed when looking at our bean plants. The plants became very tall and very dense, and there were quite a lot of pods. When you walk along the plants, you can see them in different places. Some are easy to spot. Others are partially hidden by the leaves. And that's why a close look at the plant can reveal much more than you see from a distance. At first, you might see mostly leaves. Then you look underneath, and there is another pod. You move a little farther, and there is another one. Then you notice a younger green pod nearby. This is what makes harvesting from a mature bean patch interesting. The crop doesn't always announce itself from a distance. Sometimes you have to actually look through the foliage. And once you start doing that, you realize just how many different pods are developing on the plant. There are dry pods that have already reached maturity.
There are smaller pods.
There are green pods that can still be collected. And there are flowers that appeared later. That last part was particularly interesting. Even though the plants already had many pods, some flowers appeared later than the others. Of course, when flowers appear that late, we can't know exactly how many of them will eventually develop into pods. Some may have enough time, others may not. But the important thing is that the plant was still flowering. So even when we were already seeing mature pods and younger pods, the plant was still continuing its cycle. And that's something worth watching in a real garden. You don't always get one simple result where everything happens at once. Sometimes the plant continues producing different stages at the same time. That's exactly what we're seeing here. Now, let's talk about the harvest. The green beans don't necessarily have to be collected all at once. You can gradually collect the pods that are ready. And if you have more green beans than you can use immediately, they can also be frozen and saved for later use. That gives you another option for dealing with a larger harvest. Instead of trying to use everything immediately, you can collect what is ready and preserve some of it for another meal. And when you look at a dense bean patch like this, that can become especially useful. Because there isn't just one pod. There are many pods developing throughout the plants. Some are ready earlier.
Some are smaller.
And some are still developing. So the harvest can become something you return to repeatedly rather than something that happens all at once. That's one of the things we like about watching this type of garden crop develop. You can see the difference between the pods at different stages.
One might already be dry.
Another might still be green. And another might be very small. The same plant can show all of these stages at once. And that gives you a much better picture of what's actually happening in the garden. When we first look at a dense plant like this, it's easy to focus only on the amount of green foliage. But the foliage isn't the final result. The pods are what we're really watching. And when you look closely, you can see that there are quite a few of them. This is also why I wouldn't judge a bean plant only by its appearance from a distance. A plant can look like a huge wall of leaves. But once you start looking inside that wall, you may discover pods that aren't immediately visible. So if your bean plants look very leafy, don't assume there is nothing there. Take a closer look. Look through the foliage. Check the different sections of the plant. And pay attention to the pods at different stages. That's what we're doing with this patch. We're watching what develops, collecting what is ready, and leaving the rest to continue developing. There is also something else worth noticing. The plants became very tall and dense. That creates a completely different visual impression from a small, isolated bean plant. Instead of individual plants being easy to see, the foliage creates one large, continuous-looking mass. And within that mass, you have pods, leaves, and flowers. It's almost like the plant becomes its own little ecosystem of different stages of growth. Again, we're not trying to claim that every garden will produce exactly the same result. We're showing what happened in our own garden. This is what our bean patch looked like. These are the pods we found. These are the green beans we could collect. And these are the dry pods that had already matured. That's why real garden experience can be so useful. You can read about a crop. You can look at pictures. But when you actually grow it, you see something different. You see how the plant develops over time. You see when the pods appear. You see which ones are still young. You see which ones are ready. And you see whether the plant continues flowering after pods have already formed. That's exactly what we're observing here. There are still flowers appearing, even though the plant already has pods. We don't know how many of those late flowers will have enough time to develop. But we can see that the plant hasn't simply stopped. It is still producing new growth. And that makes the final result something worth watching. For us, the most interesting thing about this bean patch isn't one single pod. It's the whole picture. The plants became tall. They became dense. There are quite a few pods.
Some are dry.
Some are green. Some are still small. And some flowers appeared later. So the plant is showing several different stages at the same time. And if you're growing beans in your own garden, this is something you can watch for as well. Don't just look at the plant from the outside. Get close. Look through the leaves. Look for the pods that are already mature. Look for the smaller green ones. And look for new flowers. That will tell you much more about what's actually happening on the plant. And when you find green pods that are ready, you don't necessarily have to collect everything at once. You can gradually harvest what is ready. Then you can use the beans fresh, or freeze some for later. That's particularly useful when the plants are producing pods at different times. You can keep returning to the same plants and collecting what has reached the stage you want. Meanwhile, the smaller pods can continue developing. And that's exactly what we're seeing here.
Some pods are ready. Some aren't.
And the plant continues changing. There is another interesting detail here. Some of the flowers appeared quite late. Looking at them, it's difficult to know how many will eventually produce pods. They may simply be too late in the growing cycle. But even so, it's interesting to see that the plant is still flowering while there are already mature and young pods throughout the foliage. It shows how much is happening on one plant at the same time. And that's probably the biggest lesson from this garden experiment. Don't judge the harvest too early. Look carefully at what the plant is actually doing. A bean plant can have mature pods, young pods, and flowers all at the same time. So the final picture isn't always obvious from one quick look. You have to observe it. You have to come back. And you have to see what develops. That's exactly what we're doing with this bean patch. We're watching the plants as they continue producing. We're collecting the beans that are ready. We're leaving the younger pods to develop. And we're keeping an eye on those late flowers to see what happens. The dry pods are also important because they show that some of the beans have already completed their development. Meanwhile, the green pods show that there is still another part of the harvest available. So you essentially have several stages of the crop in front of you. And that's what makes this patch so interesting to look at. When you see the entire plant covered with foliage, it's easy to miss what's underneath. But once you start searching, you can find pods in all different sizes. A small green pod here, a larger pod there, a dry pod farther up, and somewhere else another flower. It's almost like a treasure hunt every time you look through the plant. And that's why we wanted to show you what our beans actually looked like rather than simply telling you that they produced well. You can see the density for yourself. You can see the pods. You can see the different stages. And you can see how the plants continue developing even after we already had mature pods. So, how much can a bean patch like this actually produce? That's something we're continuing to observe. We already know that there are plenty of pods on the plants. We know that some can be harvested green. We know that some have already dried. And we know that new flowers appeared later. But the final result depends on what happens to those remaining pods and flowers. And that's why we're not going to pretend we know more than we actually do. We're showing you the real garden as it is.
Some pods are ready. Some are still developing.
And some flowers may or may not have enough time to become mature pods. That's gardening. You plant something, you watch it develop, and you learn from what actually happens. For us, this bean patch has been a very interesting one to watch because of how tall and dense it became, and because there are so many different stages visible at the same time. If you grow beans yourself, take a close look at your plants.
Don't only look at the top.
Don't only look at the outside. Look inside the foliage. You might be surprised by how many pods are hiding there. And when you find green pods that are ready, collect them gradually. If you have more than you can use, freezing some gives you another way to keep the harvest for later meals. And don't forget to keep watching the plants after you have already harvested some beans. There may still be younger pods developing. There may still be flowers. And there may still be more to come. That's exactly what we're seeing here. A tall, dense bean patch with dry pods, young green pods, and flowers still appearing. We don't know exactly how many of those late flowers will produce another harvest. But we're going to keep watching. Because that's what makes growing your own food so interesting. You don't just get the final result. You get to watch the entire process. And sometimes the plants surprise you. So if you're looking for a way to get more from your garden space, take a close look at how your beans are growing. Our own experience showed us just how tall and dense these plants can become and how many different stages of the harvest can exist at the same time. There are dry pods. There are green pods. There are young pods. And there are flowers. And that's a lot happening in one bean patch. We're going to continue watching these plants and seeing how many of those remaining flowers and young pods develop. Because the question we're still asking is simple. How much more can this bean patch produce? If you grow pole beans in your own garden, let us know how your plants are doing and whether you're still finding new pods and flowers. And if you enjoy real garden experiments, actual harvest results, and seeing what happens when plants are allowed to grow and develop in a real garden, subscribe to the channel. Because the best gardening lessons often come from watching what the plants actually do.